As the war in Ukraine drags on, Ukrainians face the daunting task of trying to get by despite frequent blackouts, supply shortages, and worst of all, attacks from Russia. Just making it through the day can be a struggle. And yet, despite these challenges, some from within Ukraine's small and medium-sized business community are already planning for their country's future, and they're thinking big.
We don't want to rebuild Ukraine. We want a new modernization system. We want a new country.
How local business communities hold the key to Ukraine's future, that's just ahead. Hello, I'm Andrew Wilson, Executive Director of the Center for International Private Enterprise, and welcome to MOVA, the business language for the new Ukraine, a podcast from SIPE where we'll take a deeper look into Ukraine's economy, policies, and business outlook. Our guest today is Kateryna Glazkova, head of the Union of Ukrainian Entrepreneurs, or SUP. Since its founding in 2016, SUP now represents over 1,000 small and medium businesses from across Ukraine. Kateryna will provide us with some key insights into the challenges and opportunities facing Ukraine's private sector. Hello, Kateryna. How are you doing today?
Hello, Andrew. Thank you for the invitation. This is a great pleasure for me to be a part of MOVA podcast and represent the voice of Ukrainian entrepreneurs.
Well, we're excited to hear from you today. Let's start off with sort of the key question that everyone is, at least around SIPE, is asking in terms of Ukraine, and because our concern is always the entrepreneur and the small and medium business in a country. And it really is, I think, when we look at the conflict and everything else, it's like, what are the biggest obstacles that your members are facing right now in doing business in the current environment in Ukraine?
The biggest obstacle is still a war, Andrew, and its impact on business. Since the beginning of the full-scale war, the Ukrainian business has suffered significant losses, and there is no company left in Ukraine, even in relatively safe regions, that hasn't felt the consequences of the war. Damaged or completely destroyed production facilities, disrupt supply chains and logistical issues, rising cost of raw materials and components, loss of skilled workers who join the armed force of Ukraine or move to safe regions or even abroad, constant shelling, requiring heightened security measures. All of these factors occur against the reduced purchasing power of population and lack of funding and insurance. But many of our members have lost at times up to 19% of the income in the first months of the year, but they have very quickly adapted to the new working conditions during the war, and the majority of companies demonstrate resilience. Moreover, they have to pay taxes, save jobs, and carry on obligation, and they still do it to continue providing their products, their services for Ukrainians. They are working extremely hard within the country, but at the same time, they are also looking for new opportunities, new partnerships, new clients abroad, and they transform quickly and have plans for different scenarios.
For those that are located in conflict areas, are they relocating? Are they reestablishing? What's been the story of those businesses that get displaced by the war?
Maybe I will tell you one example of our member. It's a very famous company which produced special pet goods, and they are from Chernihiv. Chernihiv was occupied from the first day of war. And the owner of this company stayed near 2 weeks in a shelter under the bombing attack, and then relocate his family, his workers, his small children, and his part of his producing capacity to the west of the country. And after the Chernihiv was deoccupied, he returned to his home and restarted his business in Chernihiv, and now he's working on the new products and entering new markets, and we are proud of such examples of our members in our association.
That's an inspiring story, because if you think about it, not only are you relocating your family and your workers, you've got to relocate your equipment, you've got to find space to put things in, and then you've got to move it all back.
Yeah.
And that's really an inspiring story of resilience when you think about it.
It was an open question for him to stay in the west part, but he decided he couldn't live without his people. He's thinking about jobs and decided to return to home.
That's really inspiring. Let's talk a little bit about SOUP and the services that you're providing and how you're helping your members, like our pet food manufacturer we were just talking about. What are you providing to help them face these challenges?
Our members made a decision to stay in Ukraine and working in Ukraine in spite of. So we, as a business association, really one of the largest business association in Ukraine, continue supporting businesses and has adapted to function under the condition of war as well as a team of the business association. Our mission stays the same. We are working to create and develop the favorable business environment in Ukraine, but the context has changed. And now our priorities have changed. Now SOUP supports of Ukrainian entrepreneurs during the war, assistance to companies of any size in entering new international markets, being an active players in Ukraine's accession process to the EU market. And now we have, we have the EU candidate status. So it's really important topic. We constantly provide explanation of different legislation changes and answer the most frequently asked questions received from entrepreneurs. In the end of the last year, 2022, SOUP established the International Cooperation Center with the valuable assistance types support. And this center aids Ukrainian companies in entering EU market and initiating export. As well, SOUP is going to launch in Warsaw the branch of SOUP this autumn to help our entrepreneurs to do business in Poland and EU, because we have a lot of our members in Poland now. And this is our main goal, to help our members and all Ukrainian business in such difficult context.
Yeah, you think about it, you establish yourselves in 2016. And, you think you're just going to have a quote unquote, a normal business association. And then you have COVID, you have war, you have relocation of your members, you have EU integration. I can't think of a busier agenda for a staff of a business association than all those things put together. How do you remain optimistic with all of these challenges?
We are the Ukrainians, and this is our superpower. We have to do it. We have. Really, it's difficult, but we do not choose another way.
I love the thought of being superheroes. I think all entrepreneurs are superheroes themselves, willing to risk so much for the sake of having a business and then contributing back. And certainly, I think the story of Ukrainian entrepreneurs in Poland is an amazing one. Something like 70% of all new business registrants in Poland last year were Ukrainian. I think we both hope that someday they'll be able to return to Ukraine and grow their businesses back on the territory of the country. We were talking about your advocacy work, and the EU is obviously going to be a huge issue, EU integration, but that's an issue that the government of Ukraine has to deal with as well in terms of its reforms and its priorities. And part of that, I think the balance that we saw in other countries in Central and Eastern Europe that integrated into the EU was balancing the requirements of EU integration with the reality of reform and the ability of both government and the private sector in those countries to actually comply with what are sometimes very complicated policies and other things. So, easy is always the best. What can you tell us about some of the work that you're doing and some of the priorities that you might have that can simplify some of these bureaucratic hurdles that are out there, and maybe tame the instincts a little bit of bureaucrats who just want to have a complete alignment in sometimes very difficult and onerous European regulations?
It's a very good question. Thank you. We want to live and to operate in the country with transparent and equal rules for everyone, and of course for every entrepreneur. And SOUP members approve the top 5 demands of business to the authorities: anti-corruption tax reform, total deregulation, anti-monopoly approach in infrastructure, legal framework harmonization in accordance with the European requirements, and the inavailability of punishment for officials. The most important thing for our is deregulation. The implementation of deregulation policies becomes a key component of the new development model for Ukraine and an integral part of the European integration process. An analysis of the regulatory framework of state control over economic activities shows that there are 15 types of state regulations, such as acts, conclusions, declarations, license, and so on. The large number of such documents and regulatory instruments negatively affects business opening and developments, as complex bureaucratic procedure demand efforts and resources from entrepreneurs, creating additional administrative and financial burdens. As well, we need to provide tax and customs service reform to make it means transforming to the service-oriented entities rather than fiscal pressure. It is important to the maintenance and further development of the Ukrainian economy to maintain a balance between filling the budget from the one side and excessive pressure on business from another side, which is currently working in extremely difficult conditions. We also stand for digitalization. After all, the reduction of the human factor in communication between business and government and state nullifies corruption risks. It's a very important issue as well. And Subanalytical Center works on relevant proposal and takes an active part in shaping this reform together with government, with our parliament.
That's a very aggressive, shall we say, agenda of reforms. And you know, prior to the war, I think those of us who are familiar with the path of Ukraine and maybe the path of, I won't say resistance in government, but the willingness of both elected officials and government officials to embrace change, because change is very difficult to do, especially in regulatory agencies and other things. It did not make you feel optimistic, shall we say, 2016, 2017, 2018. Even with the conflict, are you more optimistic? Is crisis bringing opportunity? What has changed, do you think, or have things changed when you look at your colleagues in government or elsewhere? Are they more receptive to dialogue with you these days?
It seems to me that we have the principal changes in our country, in the business community, or the whole country. The war changed us and maybe shift us to identify, to be more Ukrainians than we were before the war. And during this year and a half period under the full-scale war, we learned to be more transparent maybe in our business community, zero tolerance to corruption. We don't want to rebuild Ukraine. We want a new modernization system. We want a new country. We pay a very high price now for future of our children. So we have to work hard to be resilient, stay resilient, and do all our best for our win.
You know, the SIPE has worked in a lot of conflict areas, post-conflict, during conflict, pre-conflict. And we've watched the private sector in these recovery periods sometimes struggle to have their voice heard when decisions are being made about the priorities of recovery. What can you tell me about how the priorities of the Ukrainian private sector are being viewed in Ukraine, and how should these priorities be determined? We've looked at, say, the London conference. We've heard statements from government officials that they would prefer big business and big investment to small business and entrepreneurship. How are you advocating for your members in this recovery debate, and what are their priorities?
The main priority is the restoration of infrastructure, which includes the development and modernization of infrastructure such as transportation networks, energy system, logistics centers. All of those can enhance the efficiency of economic activities and attract investment, and we need it. We need the infrastructure, not only for export, but for developed country. The second priority is an implementation of energy efficiency technologies and renewable energy. Why? The development of green energy and the implementation of energy efficient technologies can decentralize Ukraine's energy system and make it less vulnerable to Russian attacks. You know, we have had previous winter blackouts in big cities, so it's really important issues. And also the development of alternative energy reduce the negative impact on the environment, because this is the next big issue for Ukraine, the ecological problem. And the last but not least is human capital development. People make country, not territory, people. We need workforce. The private sector should invest in education and skills enhancement of workers, which will improve the quality of the workforce and meet the needs of the modern labor market. In turn, the government needs a well thought out migration policy. Who will live, work, and operate in Ukraine after the war? So it's important for the private sector to collaborate with government, you mentioned it, and other stakeholders to achieve common goals in terms of development and enhancing the resilience of the national economy. And I see a significant role of the business association like SUP and other association, which includes mediating negotiations between businesses and governments and aiding both parties in making informed decisions. We could give like a business or like experts in SUP, we could give an additional expertise, for example, to government and help them to discuss and then implement these reforms.
You know, one of the other areas that's always a sore point for the small and medium enterprises in a country during reconstruction that we've seen in other places is access to public procurement. You know, often those who are well placed, those who are big, those who have experience in public procurement get the contracts. And that's not to say that small business can go after a big tender, but ensuring that the costs of reconstruction are spread as evenly as they can be to help to have sort of equal growth in all sectors of the economy is important. Small business needs that help just as much as a big business needs that, and the country needs everybody to be chipping in on reconstruction. I know Ukraine has touted its Prozoro procurement reform program, but I'm sure there are other things that need to be done in terms of helping small and mediums access the opportunities that will come through public procurement. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree that it's another case to take part in such tenders, being an SME company, small enterprise. We have the new agency for this priority. Regarding the implementation of procurement through competitions on Prozoro, to meet high international standards, entrepreneurs need to better prepare for such procurements, and especially SME. And if we even discuss a special course or trainings for small companies, how to prepare for such tenders, how to be the equal partner in for the big company and to participate in such procedures when we start big rebuilding of Ukraine. And the Committee on Construction and Architecture of SUP discuss this issue with the Minister of the Economy, Minister of Infrastructure, of course, and we try to make maybe even educational programs for Ukrainian entrepreneurs, especially SME, to be ready to take part in such competitions and maybe be like domestic partner for the big companies, international companies in Ukraine when we started the big projects.
Thank you. You know, I think about something like housing, for instance, right? So you're going to need big companies to come in, mid-sized companies to come in and help rebuild blocks of flats and damage to cities and things. But if you're in a village, you need a small business to help you build your house and rebuild and things. And I think that's part of the challenge too, is public procurement will rebuild the big apartment buildings, but then how are we going to rebuild people's homes and houses? And that to me is a place where perhaps more thought needs to be given to the role of the small business sector and the micros in particular, who will be doing those jobs, who will be helping people, you know, with the plumbing in their house or putting the electricity in the house or doing other things. So I hope that when people are thinking through their priorities on reconstruction, that they're thinking about the needs of everyone within the country to have equal access to those types of projects. You know, I'm really struck by the work that SUP has done in sort of providing greater unity and advocacy among Ukraine's entrepreneurial group. It's filling a gap that wasn't there for so many years prior to your founding. It's always been a challenge for Ukraine, and it's very heartening to see SUP taking such an important and powerful role right now in advocating and being a partner with government in rebuilding and planning for a future of Ukraine. When you talk to your members, when you talk to your board of directors, when you think about it yourself, what's the vision that you and your colleagues are sharing for the future of Ukraine? when we can get through this very difficult period.
All of us dreaming about the win of Ukraine at first, sure. And today, Ukrainian entrepreneurs pay taxes, save and create new jobs, provide their services and products for Ukrainians, entering new markets, and try to support their families, to support the whole country, because without stable economy situation, we couldn't, it will be more difficult to win the war. So since the beginning of the war, Ukrainian business adapted and improved these works. And you ask how do we do it? We transform and adapting to the new reality. So they demonstrate resilience and inspiring all the people in the whole world. And the stories of our companies, maybe, I believe, could be studied in the world's business schools, how to survive, how to run through these conditions, and how to demonstrate a resilience for a long time under such complicated context. And of course, if we say about future, we are dream about new Ukraine, transparent, modern, innovative country, which are interesting for tourists, for young people, for entrepreneurs, investors. So we are working on it and believe that we could make it all together.
Well, I want to take this moment just to thank you, Kateryna Glazkova, for a very optimistic but also realistic picture of what's going on inside the entrepreneurs movement in Ukraine. I think the role that SOUP is playing is critical, and I think you've demonstrated that moving forward. And I know you'll be an excellent partner both for your members, but also for the international community and for the Ukrainian government in rebuilding that vision that you have for the country and the role that entrepreneurs play. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for this opportunity. And thank you, SAIP. Thank you, Andrew.
And thank you for joining us on this episode of MOVA. For more information on the Center for International Private Enterprise and our work, please visit our website at www.cipe.org. If you found value in this episode, please show your support by liking and subscribing to MOVA. Sharing this podcast with others helps expand the conversation. So thanks very much.
MOVA, the business language of the new Ukraine.